Hello. This video is brought to you by the Minnetonka Coalition for Equitable Education, or the MCEE. Today's video will feature a discussion about the necessity of bias incident reporting in public schools and school-related functions. To get started, we need to define a couple of words: bullying, harassment, and bias. Bullying is an ongoing and deliberate misuse of power in relationships through repeated verbal, physical, and/or social behavior that intends to cause physical, social, and/or psychological harm. Harassment isn't the same thing as bullying? No. The distinction between bullying and harassment is when the bullying behavior is directed at a target based on a protected class. What's a protected class? We listed them over here. Bias is an unfavorable opinion not based on experience or fact against one thing, person, or group compared with another. Now, we mention bias because the important thing to remember is that bias is not the same thing as free speech. And we're going to discuss that right now. How we discuss it is based on when we talk and we use free speech, we always need to remember ethics and why ethics are important to the conversation. Joseph, Jaynes, Badwal, and Alameda argue when educators allow in academic spaces the exchange of ideas to be void of ethics, the resulting conversations impose emotional harm and can recreate colonial dynamics. In this way, Joseph et al. Notes, free speech becomes a vehicle for white supremacist ideology. For instance, in AP United States History several years ago, our instructor asked the class to debate one another on the Confederacy. We were asked to prove whether Southern states had a legitimate reason to leave the Union. The conversation was incredibly uncomfortable. Why? Because instead of focusing on the moral issue at hand, the enslavement and exploitation of Black and Indigenous people, our teacher decided it would be more beneficial for us to discuss the Confederacy's call for economic autonomy. In this conversation, the ethics, human rights, was dropped off from the discussions. And because of it, my classmates developed empathy for white colonizers that reinforces the falsehood that whites were fighting for their own way of life instead of the truth. The Confederacy was fighting for white lives, white wealth, and white entitlement to Black and Indigenous people. So let's circle back to incident reporting. Incident reporting should be a centralized, multidisciplinary approach to collecting information about bias, bullying, and harassment. In this communal response, each actor involved, whether it be a counselor, social worker, principal, restorative justice specialist, or cultural liaison, can be held accountable and ultimately hold the student accountable. The Minneapolis Public School District exemplifies this process best with a 34-page document outlining how to investigate problems on bullying, harassment, violence, discrimination, and retaliation. It covers the following elements: school district policies, investigation checklist, warning forms, interview scripts, a fact-finding report, and training resources for further instruction. Wow, that's a lot. Why do they have so much? Because intervention is tricky, and it's not something a teacher or staff member can learn in just one training session. Intervention is a skill, and it requires advice and practice. In addition, intervention should be guided by the understanding that bias is a cultural problem related to a school's climate. The Minnesota Department of Education recommends Teaching Tolerance's Speak Up Guide for its teachers with its 4 main actions: interrupt, question, educate, and echo. But is bias, bullying, and harassment really a problem at Minnetonka? Yes, but you may not think so at first. In Minnetonka Public Schools' 2020 annual report, there is no mention of the words bias, bullying, or harassment. Minnetonka's 29 Minnesota student survey results show that 93% of male 11th graders and 94% female 11th graders report no experience with a bias-related incident based on their race, ethnicity, or nationality in the last 30 days. That's wonderful, right? Wrong. Why? Because averages sometimes hide racial disparities. To find those racial disparities, we need to understand what is desegregated data. The Race Matter Institute, Inc. explains on their website, desegregated data allows us to understand how different groups are differently positioned. What this means is, the school needs to break down categorical data to smaller, different subgroups to see if there's a different impact on a specific population. In this case, we will be breaking down the bullying data based on race instead of gender. This process is a service the Minnesota Student Survey research scientists offer, and do so for free. Each school board in every district is made aware of this service. Minnetonka just doesn't use it sometimes. When we break down the data based on race, we see a more startling trend. but only 4% of white 11th grade students report being bullied about their race, ethnicity, or national origin once or twice in the last 30 days, 9% of Asian students report an incident, 11% of Black students report an incident, and 13% of Latinx students report an incident. What's worse? While only 1% of white 11th grade students report being bullied once a week based on their race, ethnicity, or national origin, 17% of Black students report an incident. Let me say that again. 17% of Black students are reportedly facing discrimination and racist commentary once a week. So then what do we do? Well, let's all wrap this up with the MCE's recommendations. Recommendation number 1. Adopt the Minneapolis Public Schools checklist or a similar process that can walk teachers through how to stage an intervention and how and who should be held accountable for that. Recommendation number 2. Collect data accurately. Include the intersectionality/identities of individuals involved within the district. You need to track information to understand if any individuals from a protected class are victimized more than others. Recommendation number 3. Be transparent about the data to the public. In Minnetonka's annual report, there should be a discussion about bias, bullying, and harassment in the district because it's a reflection of the school's climate. Recommendation number 4. Invest in prevention and widespread cultural change in the district and community. Minnetonka has started to develop district policies that strengthen prevention and intervention, but it's not enough to write a policy. Culture needs buy-in from every staff member at every level. These are recommendations, and they're not hard to implement. Literally, so many other schools already do. Thanks for watching our video. Make sure to follow us on our social media.